That I give these few words to you. I want to commend you on a few issues. Thank you for what you're doing, and then make a few humble requests on some very urgent matters that will affect the children and families in Uganda and all across Africa. The first thing I wanted to commend Your Excellency on is the leadership that you displayed and have displayed for many years on the HIV/AIDS pandemic response, and how you championed the ABC program and set the example for all of Africa in breaking the back of the AIDS pandemic and lowering your HIV/AIDS infection rates. Your Excellency, we feature you and your wife in a documentary that we created. It's called Cultural Imperialism, the Sexual Rights Agenda. And you can find that at sexualrightsagenda.org. But you are one of the main defenders of the abstinence-based approach that is the only effective way to lower AIDS rates. And this is a personal matter to me. Our family adopted 3 children from Mozambique. Their mother died of AIDS about 6 months before we met them. Their father 2 years before that. And I cared for their older brother during some of the last stages of his AIDS before he passed away. And since that time, I have been studying the approaches to AIDS all across Africa and all across the world. And in particular, I've been studying what has been happening and what has been pushed by the AIDS community and the donor countries and the United Nations agencies as the response. Can you imagine that the human rights approach that UNAIDS, the agency that is supposed to be protecting the world from this pandemic, has a document called the International Guidelines on HIV/AIDS and Human Rights that says that to stop AIDS, you have to legalize abortion, same-sex marriage, prostitution, and provide children with a radical form of sexuality education. These UN agencies are being now controlled by the donor countries and pushing agendas that are destroying the health and innocence of children and families worldwide. In particular, they're pushing, and one of the messages of the conference, an insidious form of sexuality education called comprehensive sexuality education, which brings me to my second issue for which we have great gratitude to you personally, Your Excellency, and that is that Uganda stood as an example when all the UN agencies were pressuring you and all the other ESA countries to sign on for a second round of what is called the ESA Commitment on Comprehensive Sexuality Education and linking them to sexual and reproductive health services. I've devoted a great deal of my life to identifying and exposing those programs on the ground, particularly in African countries, and those that are endorsed and funded by the United Nations and backed by International Planned Parenthood and their affiliates, including Reproductive Health Uganda, that are in every African country. They push a form of sexual social colonization by getting to your children and seeking to change their worldview on issues of sexual orientation, gender identity, abortion, and they teach them about sexual pleasure and sexual acts. And we have their manuals used all throughout Africa. In fact, one we found in Zimbabwe actually teaches children about pedophilia, bestiality, voyeurism, sadomasochism, and these have the logos of UN agencies. This is an insidious attack on the health and innocence of children, and at any moment we'd be happy to provide you the research we have on this. So we commend Uganda for standing up and not signing on to this agreement when you were under great pressure. Thank you. Thank you for protecting your children and setting the example for other African countries. And I'd also like to bring to your attention three serious matters, one of which the Honorable Ashams, the head of delegation to the Joint Parliamentary Assembly from Malawi, did a wonderful job in presenting to you. I have a brief I want to leave with you on the particulars of the ACPU agreement. You see, we call this agreement, it's a very nice word for it, but it's not an agreement, it's a treaty. And it's a binding 20-year treaty. And after working at the United Nations for 23 years, advising the African voting bloc and some of the Islamic countries and those that stand for the family, I can tell you that many of the issues that are promoted deceptively there, that the experts understand and reject day in, day out, as the African group at the United Nations, have now been insidiously inserted like cockroaches in the ice cream into the ACPU agreement in very deceptive ways. You can do a search for sexual orientation and gender identity. You can do a search for comprehensive sexuality education and abortion, and you will not find those words, but what you will find is many deceptive provisions which we have pointed out to you that will require countries that sign it to implement abortion policies, comprehensive sexuality education, and non-discrimination laws on sexual orientation and gender identity. And I'll just give you two examples of that. The ACPU treaty elevates documents like the International Conference on Population and Development, ICPD, and the Beijing Platform for Action to binding treaties with the EU. And not only does it do that, it also goes one step further and has inserted one of the most controversial phrases that's always rejected by the African voting bloc at the UN, yet it's now in this binding treaty. And it's a simple, very deceptive phrase that says, and the outcome documents of the review conferences of ICPD in Beijing. Well, Your Excellency, President MUSEVENI, the plan of the donor countries and the UN agencies is to use that phrase because they specifically, at the 20th year anniversary of ICPD, held many review conferences so they could insert that language. And those review conferences require comprehensive sexuality education, gender identity, legalization of prostitution, all the things that again, the African countries, when it's openly presented, reject, but that is just one of the many deceptive provisions. The second thing I will bring to your attention with regard to this treaty is it establishes human rights as an essential element of the treaty. And according to the law, and this is supposed to be an economic development treaty, not a human rights treaty. We have the Human Rights Council where your experts are, and the experts on human rights deliberate on human rights issues, not in a trade treaty. Yet they have a new chapter on human rights. There's over 100 references to human rights that aren't defined. And insidiously, they inserted the term sexual and reproductive health and rights, a term, again, that is most aggressively and adamantly rejected by the African voting bloc, even your country at the UN, yet now it's going to be a binding provision in this treaty. We don't have time to go through all the elements. There's 12 elements that are highly problematic, but I would, and we would, strongly urge you to really take a second look at this treaty through the lens of what we will give you to help you see through the deceptive terminology that's been carefully inserted there. And we call upon you, I echo the call from Honorable Songwe from Malawi, to please be the example, rally the other presidents, ask for amendments and remove all the harmful elements, even if that is possible, before ever considering signing this and entering into many things that I know you stand against. I was so impressed recently when I saw you on TV in an interview, and the TV interview asked you, I was embarrassed by the question. I thought it was quite humiliating coming from just seeing the patronizing colonialism inherent in that question. But she asked you something like, well, in light of this new law that you're about to pass that everybody is upset about, and President Obama doesn't like it, and has he talked to you yet? And what are you going to say to President Obama? As if you were accountable in any way to President Obama. That was just insidious. And she left you with this question, and I thought, how is the president of Uganda going to respond to this? And you were masterful. She said, they're disappointed. What are you going to say to all these people that are disappointed in you? And you answered something like, I am disappointed in them. Why are they coming into my country and trying to push their way of life? We don't go into your countries and say, you have to do this and this. I'm the one who is disappointed here. And I was so impressed and I wanted to commend you on how you handled that. The third thing that I would like to ask you, and if I didn't make one of them the ask clear, of course, number one is not to sign the treaty and to rally other presidents not to do the same unless it's substantially amended. The second thing was to stay strong and not allow Uganda, no matter how much pressure is given you, to sign up again on the ESA commitment on comprehensive sexuality education. Stay strong and keep that away from your children at all costs. And the last thing that I'm going to ask you is kind of a personal ask in a way, and that's with regard to the bill that you are being asked to sign with all the pressure of the whole world on both sides of you. I would just ask you that if you sign that bill, that you ensure that there is a pathway created in Uganda legally for people who are struggling with unwanted same-sex attraction. My heart goes out. I have great compassion to people who, while you are correct, and I've heard you say this publicly, you are absolutely correct that there is no evidence that someone is born homosexual and that they have a gay gene that's forcing them to be that way. But as I have worked with many people and counselors that help people with unwanted same-sex attraction, it is true, due to no fault of their own, some children develop unwanted same-sex attraction, and it can be due to a variety of factors in their environment, in their family, or wounds and things that have happened to them. And I would urge you, President Museveni, Your Excellency, to create a pathway in Uganda, to be the light, to have a balanced policy where you create a pathway for people to have a safe haven to come forward if they have unwanted same-sex attraction and get help, to get counseling, to help them manage those attractions and to deal with them and cope with them, because they largely can come from wounds and things that have happened in the past. I work with a lot of therapists that provide this therapy, and I have a documentary on this called Understanding Same-Sex Attraction, with the stories of children who have come in and out of homosexuality. So those are my requests to you. I ask them humbly. I am very honored to have this opportunity to thank you for the shining example that you have set for Africa and the whole world. And thank you so much, Your Excellency. Oh, and I will leave you with my book, Stand for the Family, that I hope that you will find, because you are standing for the family and setting the example. Thank you.